I'm a Minnesota guy. You probably can hear from my accent. I grew up near the Canadian border in northern Minnesota. Oftentimes on the phone, people will think I'm Canadian. So I'm going to try to, if there's literally one Canadian on this call and I hear them speak, and I will lapse into my Canadian accent. So
you can get in a boot out of James' car.
Yeah, I'm throwing those around for free.
I was like, that happens with my Southern accent sometimes when I talk to other people from the South. You think I sound Southern
I do
now.
a pretty good job of squelching it, right? Until I hear it, and then I get right back into it. And because of that, I've done a lot of work over the years with people internationally, spent a lot of time overseas, and they always tease me about how bad I am at languages. And I remind them I'm in my late 50s now, and I'm nearly unilingual. I've almost got one language mastered. So that's I think that's kind of fun. But I went to the University of Minnesota. My background is undergrad was mechanical engineering, and I got a master's degree in biomedical engineering. I did a couple of years of PhD work in biomedical engineering and decided it wasn't the right fit for me being in a lab for 3 more years. And it was a great decision for me. I was going out of my mind with sitting in a lab every night till 11 o'clock. And I started off, I was fortunate enough that when I was a sophomore in college, somebody from Medtronic came by and asked us if we had any interest in jobs working for them. And, this is back in 82, 83, I was a sophomore. And nobody, back in Minnesota at that time, the big companies were Cray Research, it was Thin Films, it was Sperry, it was Honeywell. That was kind of the glamour industries. And we really didn't even back then know much about devices. And when I started working there, and nobody, by the way, in my class was even interested. And so I went in, and I was so fortunate to get offered a job. And then they paid for my college on top of it. So, I was really lucky. And it got me interested in the area, and I've been in the device space ever since. I thought it was recession proof until about 2008, but we proved that that's not true. But we're coming back. The silver lining of COVID is that it's reinforced, in my view, to everybody the importance of the medtech space, the importance of having your supply chains within the United States. And let's hope that Congress continues to work. We've been told that there's going to be some tax credits forthcoming to entice the large companies to keep the jobs and the supply chains more local. And as we know, the markets are roaring. The medtech companies are piling up cash. The M&A environment is hot. The IPO market is hot. So, these are, the tall cotton is back again for the medtech space. After Medtronic, I went and spent 10 years at St. Jude. That's where I developed what I like to think is my core competencies. And these were development, regulatory, clinical, quality systems, reimbursement. I did do a stint in ops. I did a stint in market. I wouldn't consider myself, an expert in those areas. I never did a sales position. I had chances. I wasn't as interested in sales. When I was at St. Jude, selling a mechanical valve when you had 94% of the market share just didn't seem all that stimulating to me. But I've been able to survive without it. From there, I went to TUV. Back then it was called Product Service. Now it's to Deutschland, TÜV, which was the biggest notified body. So I was a regulator for a while and did that for a few years, right? As the medical device director was being introduced, rolled out and introduced. And then from there, I've been in the startup space ever since. And this is my 4th startup. I've had 2 in the ENT space, and I've had 2 in the cardiovascular space. So,
of course, you're on your 4th now. Of the first 3, how many of them had a successful commercialization?
It's always interesting. One of them got sold really early, so it had a good multiple, but a pretty small number because it got sold very quickly.
Is it in market today?
What's that?
Is the product in market today?
The product is in market today. So although we still were never able to reveal the terms of that deal, And then we had another company in which it was a middle implant hearing system. And that product, that's what got me interested in the ENT space. But also it was a reminder how difficult certain niches can be, even if the markets are astronomically large. Oftentimes there's a reason that markets are large and untapped.
Mhm.
And that was the hearing space. The challenges there with reimbursement are enormous. But that company actually ended up getting taken over internally. And it's still on the market. It got taken over internally by, people may know his name is Glenn Taylor. He's the owner of the Timberwolves, the Minnesota Timberwolves, and a Minnesota billionaire. He got involved and got so interested, he took it over. And so it never got taken over by a large strategic, but by a private investor.
And that product is in market today?
It is on the market, but I think they're doing a complete redesign now, as often is the case. They had a good product, but the marketing window passed them by. And now they're redesigning it. I won't go into all of the nitty gritty, but you basically have hearing aids, and then you've got cochlear implants, and this was something in the middle, right?
Yeah.
And what they've now done is they're kind of combining this to make it a better cochlear. So taking the technology from driving sound energy and matching the prescription of the patient in the middle ear, and then driving that and having a better way to drive the inner ear than just doing an electrode array like they do with a cochlear implant.
Separately and later, I'd love to talk to you about that, because back in, I think it was 14 or 15, I did a year-long consulting stint with Saphono.
Yes.
Were they direct competitors?
Right now, my understanding is I'm not fully versed on this market anymore, but you have Elmed, Cochlear Corporation, Abiomed. Those are Abiomed. Am I getting that right? No, that's not. Abiomed is the pump company. It was an Alman. It was an Alman startup. They sold it to Boston and bought it back again. So there's not a lot of competition. The good news about cochlears is that they're fully reimbursed. The bad news is that these are very complicated medical devices. They hardly get more complicated and expensive. They're up on the verge of, they're like dealing with a bat in terms of the complexity and the cost.
Before you go to the third one, do you get Timberwolves tickets whenever you want?
Yeah, I would, you can insert your own Timberwolves joke there about whether you want them if you can get them, but no, unfortunately not. The reason he got involved is one of our investors was a friend of mine from my hometown, Kevin McHale, who people may know from the Celtics. And he knew Glenn because he had worked for Glenn after his Celtics career. He was a GM and the coach of the Wolves. And so, Kevin came in as an investor, and then in his family, and then Glenn Taylor got involved. So long story, the other company was in the heart failure space. That was a company called Acorn Cardiovascular. We didn't make our money back on that. And yet I would argue that we probably did the most prominent clinical work in heart failure that's been done in the last 20 years. All of the clinical work we did was the gold standard on reverse remodeling. And there's literally not been a new heart failure outside of pumps, which are really not new. There hasn't been a heart failure therapy introduced really since cardiac resynchronization. We had a great therapy. It should have worked. We ran into FDA delays that were probably resulting from the long saga with Dan Schultz and Donna B. Tillman and Chuck Grassley. And, you can go on. And then Jeff Shuren came in and, kind of shut down the IDE process for a couple of years. And to his credit and to Bill Mazel's credit, he then brought in Bill Mazel. And I can only say that they completely turned around CDRH and ODE in terms of how they were doing their business, to their credit. We were unfortunate. If we would have been able to last another 2 years, I think it would have been a $300 to $500 million acquisition. But between the challenges of the FDA and the challenges of the markets in 8, 9, 10, 11, we were in a vast recession, and capital was so tight. It was just a 1-2 punch we couldn't overcome.
It's obvious everyone on the call, but I'll emphasize that one of the reasons that I enjoyed talking with you so much is because of how informed you are from a regulatory and political standpoint, and how active you are politically. I don't know if all of that time and effort comes back to you because of how log jammed and frustrating our system is, but there are a few people on whom I'd call before you to kind of get a fair landscape of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been involved in advocacy and in the trade organizations. We're in 3 right now. Medical Alley, which is local, MDMA, which is a small company national trade organization, and then AdvaMed, which is the large company, but also has a small company group called Excel. I'm a big believer that we all need to be involved in that. And by the way, the price for startup companies that don't have a lot of revenue or pre-revenue is extraordinarily inexpensive. So there's just no reason not to tap into those resources. And you can be as involved as you want to be or don't want to be. And then the company we have now is called Perceptus Medical. Our device is called the Hummingbird device. It's a tympanostomy tube system. And what we've done is we have developed a tool and a procedure that enables ear tube procedures for children to be done in an office, rather in an ENT's office rather than in an expensive operating room, whether it's a hospital outpatient department or an ASC. And with that, we've been at this now for a while. My neighbor and I were, literally formed this company. It's kind of a funny story. He's a pediatric anesthesiologist, and I didn't even know that's what he did for a living. I didn't think he knew I was in med tech for like the first 3 years that we knew each other. We just were neighbors, and our kids loved to play together. And the kids would be in the pool and in our pool, and we'd be having a beer or two, catching up at the end of a long day. And he, a very bright guy, had a lot of interest in patents. And so, when we realized that we were interested in the same space, we were going through some of his patents and ideas that he had for IP. And this is one that we really thought had some potential. And the more we dug into it, the more we were convinced that there was potential here. Now, we didn't know whether it was, a licensing opportunity or a company, what was it going to be? But the more we went along, he was really doing this with a friend of ours who was a designer. So we really had 3 of us. And with that, they were working on it kind of as a basement skunkworks project. And I was with Acorn. And then when we sold the assets of Acorn, I joined Perceptus. The idea being that we would examine the economics in great detail first, figure out what the options were, and if it was good, we'd try to raise capital and convert from an LLC to a C Corp. And that's what we've done. That happened in 2012. We converted to a C Corp. We now have we've done our clinical work. We've got our clearances from the FDA, and we are now doing a pilot commercialization. Yeah, here's an animation of our device. And the idea is that instead of multiple surgical passes, which are traumatic for the patient, you do it in one pass. There's a speculum in the ear canal. You're going to remove the wax. That's the quadrant of the eardrum, the tympanic membrane. You do. So there's a curette removing wax. This is the application of a topical anesthetic. Numbs the incision site. And here comes our device, which has the ability to deliver the tube in one pass and very quickly. So that delivers the tube, significantly reducing trauma for the child or the patient. And we're simple, we're safe, we're less expensive. The opportunity here, that's your value proposition, which to me is the bulk work of every successful startup. Is you have to have the right value proposition, which really in my mind takes into account reimbursement also on the economics. And we're able to do instead of doing these in the operating room, which are expensive and not convenient and challenging for the parents and for the children, the patients. And then you also have concerns related to general anesthetic in young children. We show that we can do these in an office with nothing but topical in less than 5 minutes in a very convenient environment that is more efficient for the ENT, more convenient for the parents. It eliminates any risk of general anesthetic and it is far less traumatic for the child. So there's a lot to like here, and best of all, yeah, coverage, ear tubes are already covered. There's already codes in place and there's already payment. So, and it
But for
is.
the layperson like me, this white area, I'm assuming, is the eardrum, conventionally known as the
Correct.
eardrum. And
Correct.
this tube you've inserted, tell us a little bit about the condition that the child has that requires this. And I'm assuming that the sound is having a hard time coming through the eardrum without the entrance of this new hole.
Right. Most children have eustachian tubes that are not fully developed until their neck grows. And what that really means, the eustachian tube connects the middle ear to the back of the throat and allows you to equalize pressure. When children are young and their neck is not grown yet.
Age range
Instead
we're
of-
talking? As young as old as?
Anywhere from 6 months to 3 years.
Okay.
The eustachian tube in an adult is vertical and open and can drain effectively and stay open. When it's children, they're flaccid and flat, which makes it difficult for the eustachian tube to function correctly, and they cannot drain or equalize pressure. As adults, we equalize pressure all the time. I mean, when you're driving in a car and going up in a mountain, or ascending or descending on a plane, we all will open up our jaw. We don't even think about it, but what you do by opening up the jaw is that it opens up your eustachian tube and equalizes pressure.
How many of you just did that? I just did.
Correct. Right. Everybody does it. Look on a plane sometime when a plane is going up and down and everybody is doing it, or they're chewing gum, or they're doing something to initiate the opening of their eustachian tube. And this is also why on planes you have a lot of crying babies. It's not just that they're out of their routine and that they're unhappy. What happens is that if you can't equalize pressure in your middle ear, it's tremendously painful. So these poor little kids are in a lot of pain, and there's nothing that they can do about it. Virtually all children have some degree of eustachian tube dysfunction. And then the eustachian tube, until it grows, about 1 out of 15 children end up. Hold that thought.
Yeah.
There's the eustachian tube. Because of this, children have about 1 out of 15 children end up getting ear tubes. And there's a billion different designs of ear tubes. It's probably the single most cleared product code in the FDA system. 510K, it's class 2, and has historically not required any clinical data. They've had a guidance out, but the guidance has now been pulled and they're rewriting it. So we're not sure what they're going to come up with, but our tube is cleared. And the reason there's so many different types of tubes is to facilitate the delivery. Physicians have different preference on how to deliver the tube, and they're all looking for ways to deliver the tube more efficiently and with less trauma for the patients. Now, we didn't come up with some brilliant idea that nobody had ever thought of, and that's because adults are done in the office already. Almost all adult procedures are done in the office. So for children whose eustachian tube doesn't develop correctly, and have long-term issues, a lot of those are the adults that end up getting tubes. Adults can get tubes for other reasons too. But there's about 150,000 adult ear tube procedures that occur in the United States annually. And so we knew that if you could do them in adults in the office, and they're not pleasant for adults, but they can sit through it and stay still. The idea was, could we come up with a technology that would reduce the trauma for the children to the point where you could do these in the office in a way that the children could tolerate?
Now, Stephen, let me ask this,
All right.
for the illustration that I've taken off the screen, but the little blue insert, is that unique to you, or is your value proposition simply tubes like this are aplenty, but we're the only ones that you can do with a local anesthetic and less traumatic? Is that it? It's just the delivery of the concept.
It's really the delivery system that's more important in the tube. However, there are 3 primary models of ear tubes that make up most of the market. The one that we're using is called an Armstrong beveled flange, and that tube is what we're doing is very similar to the classic Armstrong. And Joe, if you go to your right, I guess, can people see my cursor too?
No, just me. You
Probably
can
not.
me.
Yeah, if you go to the, right where you're at on this side of the tube, that little angled flange, that's the hallmark of an Armstrong bevel flange tube. We chose that one because it fits the best in our delivery system. And realistically, there's not much functional difference between tubes. It's really more about delivery preference.
So
But if you go to the other side of the
buy that,
eardrum,
or do you make that? The blue thing, do you just source that from somebody?
yeah, we source it.
Got it.
And then you go to the other side of the eardrum, and that little tab, you see the vertical column on top? That's something that we have some intellectual property protection on, and it may seem really simple, but what it is, it's a depth indicator. And so what happens is that the surgeon will push in until that depth indicator is touching the eardrum. Then they know they're in the correct position and that angled flange is fully behind the eardrum. And then so that at that point, they'll pull back a little bit. And then we have a slider that releases a cutting sheath and allows the flanges to open up. And that's how our device works. And so, yeah, we do have some IP protection. And this tube has got some other proprietary things going on with it that allow it to work in our system that we can't reveal. But, really it's part of a system that delivers a tube in one pass. And if you compare it to how they're done with standard instruments, they come in, they'd remove the wax, and then they would come in with a myringotomy knife and make a half moon shape incision. And then you would think that you would just then they'll take an alligator clip and they'll go in holding the tube and try to push those flanges that you saw behind the eardrum.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is oftentimes it doesn't work that way because of the angle that they have going in through the ear canal. And so what they do is they'll get a little part of the flange into the incision, and then they have to take a pit and they will poke and poke and poke until they can push the flange in. So that poking motion and constantly kind of plunging a fresh incision is where the trauma comes in for a patient. And that's why it's, if you talk to adults, about a third will say it was no big deal. A third will say it was not pleasant, but I was able to get through it. And a third will say it was awful. And part of the problem is that all the time that they're doing this, if there's any fluid in the middle ear or there's any blood, they have to keep doing suction. So then they got to come out again, go in with suction, which is very loud and have a very strange sensation, because you're strongly pulling fluid from the middle ear, which is impacting the acicula chain and even pulling on the window going into the inner ear. And so it's a difficult sensation to go through. Adults don't like it. And this is why children's ear tube procedures have historically all been done in the operating room under general anesthetic to keep them still while they're able to get this tube into place.
Stephen, if you'll allow me, this is my,
questions.
I think this is our 90th conversation. And yes, there are some things here. I'd like to, I can definitely tell how engaged the group is. So thank you. I know some of the questions, regardless of what's been written here, is they're going to want to know, how long have you been at this? What inspired this? Do you have a child that had this problem or something like that? How it was brought to your attention? Where are you in the process? How far, if things go as you hope, would it be until you are commercial? And what are your big challenges right now? So when did you start?
Yeah, let me, that was a lot. I was doing pretty good on the first three questions. Let's go back.
When did you start?
How did we start this? Part of the reason that I got into this, again, I started this with M&A, but it's a great Minnesota story, right? It's medical alley. This is how we do things. You have a lot of people and ideas come out of nowhere. But what really got me interested in it is I have a son with spina bifida. And so he has had, probably 28, 30 surgeries. My wife and I and our family have spent a lot of time in the children's healthcare system and children's hospitals. And I wanted to do something in pediatric devices. Now, pediatric devices have been historically challenging because of the size of the markets. I mean, they have smaller markets than they do for adult devices, and thankfully so, because kids don't get sick as much. The incidence and prevalence is less, and it can make it difficult for manufacturers to get the developers and manufacturers to get the return on investment that you need. Yeah, that's Spina bifida. Noah's a wonderful kid. He's developmentally delayed. He has never been ambulatory, but he is absolutely the greatest kid ever. Everybody loves him. He has no bias. He's just a wonderful kid. And again, that was our exposure. What can we do to help, with pediatric devices? Now, all of those challenges that I just talked about for ped devices, they don't apply for ear tubes. This is a huge market, and clearly, I believe, an untapped market. I mean, you knew you could do these in adults, and I said that there's 150,000 adult ear tube procedures that happen per year. There's another million children's, patient procedures that happen every year in the operating room with children. So this massive market, you have 1 million procedures annually. It's estimated there's probably 2 million in China, and then, throw in another million in Europe. I mean, this is a massive market. And that's why we went after this. I mean, with every entrepreneurial effort, I mean, you have to look at the size of the market, and you have to look at the value proposition. And that is, we looked at this and we felt that the economics would work. We felt that there was a growing momentum of moving procedures whenever possible from the hospital to the ASC and to the office. I mean, the office is obviously the lowest cost point of service. So there's another thing. We didn't have to invent. If we were the first procedure to try to go from the OR to the office, I mean, we couldn't do it. We're too little. But dozens and dozens of procedures have moved into less invasive points of services and with less invasive methodologies. For example, in transcatheter aortic valve replacement at Abbott Northwestern, 90% of these are done under light sedation. They're not even putting the patients under general anesthetic. And these are oftentimes older, elderly patients. So it's tremendously beneficial to be able to avoid any risk associated with general anesthetic in the elderly population and delirium, to be able to do things under light sedation. Excuse me. And then if you can go to the office, it's even better. So again, we have an opportunity here. The value proposition is, excuse me, large market. We've shown clinically it's safe. We've done 500 children, half of them under sedation, half of them in the office. We started off iteratively and went from general anesthetic, to sedation, to the office, to just build up and to build our case and to build the clinical foundation. And now, so we've got clearances with our device under general, clearances with our device. And by the way, and that clearance under general applied for adults in any level of anesthetic, any point of service. But for children, it was only under general. So we were being very conservative. Then we did a study and showed and got clearance for our device in children in sedation. Then we did another study and with our device and got a clearance for children in the office. And it's indicated for children 6 to 24 months. And we're in a process now of expanding those age indications. So we built up, I'm a big believer that even if you get a 510K cleared quickly or CE marking, you still need to have the clinical foundation to build your market effectively, right? And so that's what we did. And I think it's probably more so with children maybe than even adults. I mean, everybody wants to be cautious with children. So we built this brick by brick, from the excavation and the basement up. We built that. I always consider the clinical foundation as the basement, right, of your company. And you can't have a solid house if the foundation is faulty. And now we have framed the house and we've sided it, and now there's your commercial experience, and now that's what we're moving into right now.
Steve, I'm going to let Michelle talk for just a sec. Michelle, you had a timely question. Go ahead.
Oh, hold on. What was it? Oh, CTIP. So that's a group out of based in California, but they're like a advocacy group for pediatric devices. And I was just wondering if you were connected with them.
Do you have a connection if he's not?
No,
I do.
yeah, no, we're not connected with them.
She knows how to
We
get you
do
there.
have a clinical site in California. We're at Cedar Sinai, and they're now a commercial site. So I mean, we've got some. Southern
CTIP is
California.
quite interesting because they're actually partnered with the FDA on the pediatric initiative, and they have FDA funding. So it's very rare to actually get a group that has money from the FDA, because FDA doesn't have money in the first place.
The initiative, are you talking about the consortium, or are you talking about the new SHIP MD?
Let me look up what CTIP stands for.
By the way, while you're doing that, there was a question. We outsource almost everything we can. We did most of the design ourselves. We did not hire us. We did bring in a design firm to give us some ideas, after we were quite a ways down the path. But there was some help and there were some good ideas. We did the clinical work ourselves. We did not hire a CRO. We did hire a CRO to set up a database for us. And so we used a database that was established for us, but everything else we did ourselves. But everything related to the manufacturing has been outsourced. We're using a company in Minneapolis, St. Paul, a contract manufacturer called Resolution Medical. They're terrific, big business. They're really, really good. And we have 4 FTEs in our company, a lot of really good consultants and contractors that we rely on, and then everything else is outsourced.
Where, if anywhere, do you have a functional gap right now that perhaps someone on the call could patch you with, help you with? What's your biggest need right now?
I don't mean to sound.
If you're all buttoned up, that's great.
We don't have any gaps right now.
That's great.
Now they could happen in the future. As we're doing a pilot, and we're essentially doing a pilot to, verify the ENT demand, the parental demand, to develop the playbook, and to verify the payment mechanisms for the ENT to make sure that they're adequate. And we have checked all of those boxes. And so, like with every startup, it's kind of the same story. And that is that our goal here is we are required from a fiduciary standpoint to optimize the return on investment for our shareholders, right?
Who are your shareholders? How have you done your raises?
Our raises have been, we have not used any venture capital. That was by design. We weren't convinced that it was a best fit. We have had a number of individual investors. We've got some investment from China, and we've got some pretty big angels. So we've done it differently. We didn't think venture capital was the best fit. We thought we could do this frugally, without burning through tremendous amounts of capital, and we've done that. And now we're in a position in which we're constantly evaluating, every option for optimal return for our shareholders, whether that's growth, whether that is partnership with a strategic. You notice I use every euphemism we can because we have to be careful with how we describe what we do. But this is what everybody does, right? And with growth, we'd raise more capital, and we're very confident that if we want to commercialize this, that now would be the time in which we would enlist venture capital assistance or strategic investors or both, and do a larger, broad, nationwide introduction. But again, we're also open to other partnership opportunities with the strategics in the space.
Is that someplace that we might be able to help introduce you to potential money sources?
I think we're in pretty good shape on this. We've developed these relationships with strategics for a long time. So we've been talking, and we know the people, and we know the strategics in the space that are in the ENT space. There's a lot of good players in this space, and we're in pretty good shape on that. I would say one of the advantages we have is, we have a very experienced group. We only have 4 people, but the amount of experience between us is. And
you're so solid. It's obvious to anyone listening to you. Luke, I've invited you to come off mute. You want to ask your question?
Okay. Can you elaborate a little bit more on your journey bringing it to market, like things that unexpectedly went smooth or unexpectedly had setbacks?
You know,
I'm getting a very slow and steady vibe from you, that there hasn't been a lot of variability.
no, there hasn't been as much variability as you might think, although it's always easier in retrospect to discount the variability. The biggest challenge is, as with every startup, is always raising capital, right? Raising capital is very, very tough. And you need to leave no stone unturned. You need to be indefatigable. I mean, and you need to have the thickest skin imaginable. It's very difficult. I've been fortunate, and in my previous experiences, I had a lot of contacts and people that I've met over the years, whether it's on a strategic level or on the board level or on a venture capital level, that I've been able to tap into those. And that is what convinced us that we took risk without going after venture capital money. But it also allowed us to have an extraordinarily clean capital structure. And we wanted that because it gave us the most flexibility. There were certainly some moments as you're going along where you're getting tight on cash, and these are really hard. If you've got venture capitalists on your board, it's easier. So I mean, I took the brunt, I think, of the stress on this because you don't have VCs that are right there with you. I mean, you have a board, but nobody has enough money invested that they're losing sleep beside you. The VCs do. And so we took this chance. We thought it was the right way to go, and that long term, it would pay dividends if we were successful by having tremendous flexibility, by having a lower amount of capital raised and frugal, which would give us greater opportunities for IRR and return on investment from our shareholders, and by having a clean capital structure, and we've achieved that. I think there were times it was certainly hard on me as a CEO. If you don't have some of those 2 a.m. wake ups, for me, it was never a matter of falling asleep. It was a matter of waking up. I'd fall asleep instantly, like 11:30, but then the worst is when you wake up where your heart racing. And if it's 5 a.m., you're like, okay, I'll live with that. The worst is when you look over and it's 1:30. You're like, oh, not 1:30.
Yeah, I'd stay away from trazodone. That'll knock you out for a long time.
Yeah, I know. My wife had a few moments where she'd get up in the morning and, see a bottle of bourbon and a small glass on the table and ask me, should I be worried about this?
That's funny.
I said, no, there's nothing to worry about. I was up, I had some bourbon and then I was back in bed. No worries.
Paul, you've been very patient. You had a question.
Thank you. Steve, love everything you're doing. My background is twofold. I've done a lot of work with sales and go-to-market strategy and mentoring startups with the Founder Institute in Silicon Valley, and wrote a book on sales. So been in that space for 20 plus years. And I also drive sales for a logistics company in the Silicon Valley that's FDA approved as a contract manufacturer. And my question to you is, what is your go-to-market strategy? You seem to have everything buttoned up, everything is good. I'm just curious about your go-to strategy model, your channel, how you're getting the product to the customer, to the doctor's offices.
Well, it's hard to summarize quickly, but I would say this. We did something a little bit differently. Instead of raising, enormous amounts of capital and hiring a lot of expensive reps and having them go out and figure out the playbook and in a year, maybe raise more money to hire more reps, replace half the reps you have because they're not doing well. We didn't want to do it that way. We wanted to do it as a pilot, where we really thought that we could check all of the boxes here and provide enough validation of the business model that we would be in a better position once we completed the pilot to make a decision on where to go next. So our go-to market strategy was to do it as a pilot. We're all reps in our company. We have a chief commercial officer who's terrific. He's local. He came out of the ENT space. He fits. I mean, he's fantastic. He is young enough to have carried a bag for an ENT company, but old enough to have been in a vice presidential position of sales in the ENT space. So he knew he's young, he's hungry, he knows everybody, and he's just great. And so he's leading our direction, but we're all reps.
So you're
And-
going directly to the doctor's offices.
Well, we're going to the ENT's office. So, you know, you have the referrer, right, which is the general practitioner, or more commonly the pediatrician, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But they have to refer, you know, kids are going through 6 or 7 rounds of ear infections before they're referred to the ENT. And then they will refer on to the ENT or make a decision on whether to do tubes or not. And so, you know, this is not a product that is designed for pediatricians, though they are the referrers. But we analyzed parental demand, and, you know, how would a parent, you know, like the opportunity of shared decision-making, right? Where they would have an opportunity to not just have to do this in an operating room, but have an opportunity to do this in the office.
Yeah, it's an
Then we analyze
education-based
the
marketing
pediatricians.
model.
Yes, and then we
Yeah, I
analyze the pediatricians. Would they be willing to refer? Is this an important concept to them? The idea of having another in-office option that was less expensive and less risky. And then we analyzed the ENT demand. We analyzed it with partners, we have strategic partners, we analyzed it ourselves. And we have a competitor in the space that's called Tusker Medical. They were part of Acclarent. And when Acclarent was bought by J&J, Tusker was the #1 product in their pipeline. And so Tusker went at it a little bit differently because, you know, it wasn't their primary product line. It was balloon sinuplasty. You guys all probably know Acclarent. $800 million purchase by J&J back in 2008 or 9. And then when J&J had the product, the challenge that they had was that they wanted to go directly to the office instead of iteratively building up like we did. We felt you had to iteratively do that. And we worked with the FDA to do that. And so then J&J, I think, got frustrated, and they sold it to Tusker, who immediately went back to an iterative approach, and they sold that company pre-revenue in January of 2020 for about 140 million. And so that set the market for us, and also, in our view, validated our strategy of doing a pilot, right? And so now that we've done a pilot and we developed our own playbook, we know now before we hire a rep, we know the playbook. We've got the playbook for the rep. They don't have to figure it out. We've developed it, and we're in a position again. We could partnership. We could partner with a strategic on any level of business strategy, whether it's exit, whether it's distribution. We can do it ourselves. And so I'm proud of the fact that all the way along here, we didn't really follow the pack in terms of how to do things. We were confident in our approach and how we could do that. Now, it's easy to say, you know, when things are going well. I mean, it's possible we could have failed and I'd be sitting there going, man, that was a big mistake. But we believed in what we were doing. We believed in our approach. And I think that again, the Tusker acquisition has validated our approach. It's pre-revenue. They didn't have a cent of revenue when they were acquired. And our product is enormously better than theirs. Their procedure times are 45 minutes.
I like how you're doing almost everything a little differently with the path you're taking looks like you're building to hold and building to create tremendous value until you know exactly what to do next when you decide what to do when you grow up. Fantastic, right. Very, very sustainable models, just sustainable growth model. Given that, then I'm assuming even on the supply chain, you're doing it differently. So given the nature of your product, you're selling the initial tool, but then I'm sure you're making the majority of your money on the replenishables, which are on the inserts that go in, because you're really creating a whole new, you're shaking the market with a new treatment approach.
Actually, it's
a fair assumption?
Tool. So the tool is not reusable.
Okay.
So we're making money on the entire model, right? I mean, the reason it's disposable is because, number one, the tolerances that you'd be dealing with here, these are very small tolerances, would be very difficult for disinfection and re-sterilization. And number two, in an ENT's office, re-sterilization is not simple. Most of them, you know, they can't ETO, you know, so they got to send it out. So the right model on this for our customer was to have a disposable product.
Awesome.
Now we have, certainly there's always a discussion of reposable. Would you have a more of a Cadillac device that, that you have an insert in, a snap tip that is disposable, but we haven't gone down that path. And those are all just, pie in the sky thoughts. We like where we're at. And
Are you managing your own supply, your distribution and shipping from your office in Minnesota?
Paul, let me thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to say I can definitely put you guys in touch. Jan, you
Okay.
had something that you wanted to share in terms of a resource material that you'd advise against. What was that?
Yeah, I was just looking
Thank
at
you.
the tray behind, and it looked like you have a tray with a PET top or a Tyvek top that you can peel off, and you're putting it in a carton. I was wondering if your tray was PETG or if you've used polystyrene, because I can't tell from how far away that picture is. And if you're using polystyrene, get out of it.
Yeah, we're using PETG. Thank you.
Okay. Well, the other thing, you just said you were ETO sterilizing.
Right.
And that's getting to be more of a problem with plants shut down and stuff. Are you looking at alternatives?
It's an industry-wide challenge, right?
Right.
I would say that we have not looked at different. We felt there was a reason from our materials that we chose ETO. Okay. And, we're comfortable with that for now. We know that there's been some environmental challenges to the space, but bigger companies and greater minds than ours are looking at that. There's been improvements in residuals. So and we watch pretty closely what the trade organizations are doing. And I'll just say that for now, we're part of an industry that predominantly uses ETO.
Well,
Eva,
yeah,
excuse
I
me, Jan.
understand that, but their plants are being shut down and there are people having problems. So they do have, hydrogen peroxide sterilization and some other things that could probably work with your device. You might want to start looking at it.
Steve, if you'll allow me, I have like my sterilization go-to guy and Jeff Sauter. If you've not met him, I'd like to make that introduction. It'll be a half-hour easy conversation, very much in depth with what Jan is talking about. Sound good? Steven? Yeah. Eddie, you had a question.
Now, let me send a quick text to somebody. I apologize.
You bet. Oh, it
I'm
is
late for something.
It is the top of the hour. We can wrap here. We respect your time.
I can go a couple minutes over.
Eddie, quickly, you want to ask your question? Eddie, are you frozen? Yeah, he tends to do that from time to time. He's like a model. You could just just stare at him, and then he goes away. Sanjeev asked if you're comfortable sharing how much you've raised to date.
Sorry, I can't share that.
Fair enough. Eddie, welcome back.
Hello. Yes, it's the lovely countryside English Wi-Fi. Don't get me started. Anyway, Steve, good to meet you. And I would love to chat with you offline because you deal with children's ear tubes. I deal with older men and women's different tubes down the other end of the body. But a lot of similarities. But it seems to me that one of the best metrics for your business is how many ENTs have experience with your device so far, and are they using it regularly? And I would imagine that that's probably the best way to demonstrate how much traction you're getting.
Yeah, I'm going to be careful on how much I reveal commercially, but since we're doing a pilot, but there is information on our website, and we're really, really happy at the response from the ENT community and the pediatric community and the parents on our product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, like I say, have you got it? In general, how prevalent is performing this procedure in the ENT community today, absent your device?
Is your question, do you think that with his introduction that more of this procedure will be done? Will it grow the market?
Well, I would presume the market is probably going to be static in terms of the children either need it or they don't. But then you get into that whole idea of restaurant table turns. How efficient do you make it? If it's the same amount of reimbursement, but they're doing it in their office and it's taking 5 minutes rather than booking hospital time and so on, then the margins for everybody are much better. but the same
I
number
would say this.
of procedures might be happening. I just don't know what the number of procedures is.
You're blocking-
Thank you, Eddie.
you're gonna be blocking time for a procedure. And as in an operating room, you're gonna block time. The amount of procedure time itself is only one component in the time block, right?
Yeah.
And you have the same issue in an office. You're gonna be blocking time. You have nurses involved, you have the prep, you have the ENT, you have the parents in the procedure. So yeah, there's blocking time, and we think there's overall efficiencies with ENTs not having to fight for OR time, where they can do things in their own office. The actual procedure, still has a block of time and costs associated with the ENT and their staff that they have to be compensated for. The actual time with our device is a small amount of time, but that's similar to the actual amount of time with instruments in a standard tube procedure.
Yeah.
So I guess my point is that we reduce trauma, but you still have a block of time that has to be compensated for, and it's a very large market.
Eddie, thank you. I'm going to move to
Sure.
Sanjeev with our last question. Before I do, Steve, for your reference, Michelle looked it up. CTIP stands for the Consortium for Technology and Innovation for Pediatrics. As a follow-up, I have two so far. One, Michelle, I'll put you in touch to make sure that she gives you that introduction, and I'll introduce you to Jeff Sauter, my sterilization guru. And if there's something else that I've forgotten, please let me know. Sanjeev, wrap us up with your question.
Yes, Steve, did you get a FDA 510K, or did you get a PMA on this, or a de novo? What was
He joined us a little late. He talked about his 510K. What
Yeah,
was your thought?
510Ks.
Okay, and you didn't take any venture capital money at all?
None at all.
Wow. Yeah, I'm doing a startup. That's why I was wondering. So in the point of care space.
Now,
Thanks.
Every startup is different, on the regulatory path, the clinical path, the reimbursement path, and capitalization strategy. It all starts with your value proposition. What's there and what are you going to provide to the stakeholders, right?
Correct.
And like everybody, we've got multiple stakeholders. We've got the payers, we've got the ENTs, we've got the pediatricians, we have the parents. There's a lot of people involved, and you have to craft your strategy around that. I wanted to say, Michelle, I wanted to say one more thing. Yeah, I thought that was a consortium. There is a project going on right now called ShipMD. And ShipMD has got industry, it's got the FDA, it's got payers, it's got the American Academy of Pediatrics. This is a project that's been going on for a couple of years to try to figure out how to get more development of pediatric devices. And again, the challenge is not for devices like ours where there's large markets. The challenge is for devices with smaller markets. And so they're trying to come up with better ways to streamline the clinical process, streamline development process, provide more clear pathways on coding and payment. And so I would encourage everybody to, if they have interest in pediatric devices, to look up ShipMD. We are through the initial phase, which is kind of the initial design and laying out a strategy. And then the second is going to be completing the design, and the third is going to be rollout. But the idea is that you'd have hospitals, a hub and spoke system, you'd have payers involved, and all of this is fitting a requirement from the FDA, from Congress, that has been pushing FDA and the industry to have more pediatric devices developed. So ShipMD is something that AdvaMed is involved in. They put a lot of time and effort into this, the AAP. We're all working on this, and you can look it up and get a lot of information on it. I think it's very important.
Thank you. And it occurs to me as you were talking, actually, I just looked up ShipMD, SHIPMD.
Yep.
.org, because it's not .com.
Yeah, I believe it's org.
Okay. Do you have a market access specialist on your team?
Well, I would say that our chief commercial officers are market access specialists.
For reference, shipmd.org is not working either. Let's see, www. Nope, I'm not getting it. So let me try one more.
I wonder if it's Gov.
How about SHIP? Okay. Critical Path Institute?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the Critical Path Institute was a facilitator of the first phase.
Yeah, here it is. So it's cpath.org/shipmd.
And CPAP is now done with their phase, and it's going on to another phase in which it's very possible NIH could be involved going forward, but that's yet to be determined.
It's unclear if there is a direct site for ShipMD or if this is all we have right now.
Yeah, I can, I'll send you that, Joe. I
Okay,
should know that off the top of my head. I'm sorry, I know.
but you know what? It's inexcusable after this very entertaining, persuasive, and informative hour. It's so unfortunate that we have to end on that kind of note, Steve.
Well, everybody, again, I'm sorry I had to speak in somewhat broad platitudes, and the information I have out there is on our website, but a lot of what we're doing is confidential. But, my takeaway for everybody, it all starts with your value proposition.
Speaking music to a marketer's ears. I enjoy you so much, Steve. I'm so grateful for the time. I know how tight it is. I know Michelle is going to be doing a webinar for RAPS soon. She wrote me privately and would love to get a few minutes of your ear in preparation for that if you're up for it. And it's far off, who knows, between your family and your professional life, if it's possible to lure you to San Diego for May 10th through the 12th for my next event, COVID
What is
willing.
the event, Joe?
My 10X, it'll be my 11th event. May 10th through the 12th in San Diego. I'd love to have you back.
Sounds good. I've got it written down.
Thank you.
By the way, the ship thing was, what they were looking upon was the initial meeting. Somebody had just sent a question. And that meeting was where they presented the design, the idea, and a plan with multiple work streams. And then they took that public feedback and incorporated it into a full plan, which is now being, rolled out. So that's the next step.
For the team, our next two events are Mehdi, both are from team members. Mehdi is going to talk about how FDA emergency use changed what he knew about medtech. And you met Paul in his great big hat. On the 24th, he'll talk about resilient supply chain solutions for a post-COVID marketplace, which should be pretty interesting. Stephen, profound thanks.
Thank you.
To be helpful. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
Thank you. Bye.